This happens to rock stars and professional athletes and famous people and CEOs because what happens is they start to believe the lie that they're special and they deserve special treatment and that they're wonderful because people tell them what they want to hear, they laugh at their jokes louder, and they praise them. And while it's not always fake, it's often exaggerated, and it's easy for any leader to start to believe this stuff. Welcome to At the Table, the podcast that lives at the intersection of culture, teamwork, organizational health, and leadership. I'm your host, Pat Lencioni, joined by my trusty co-host, Cody Thompson, in Utah today. How you doing, Cody?
I love it when you throw the word trusty in there, Pat. Makes me feel extra special, so thank you.
Well, we took about an hour preparing for this podcast today. We had quite the interesting conversation about it, and it's going to be an interesting podcast, I think. What's the topic, Cody?
Leadership lessons from the Kisscam.
That's right. We are going to go back now that the firestorm in the media and in social media has kind of passed from the Coldplay concert Kisscam incident. We wanted to take kind of a sober view of this and talk about lessons for leaders and organizations, because in spite of all the memes and the jokes, this is really a tragic situation for two families at least, and for a company to a lesser extent. And there's some things that probably need to be talked about that leaders need to hear, because leaders are more susceptible to these kinds of problems than others. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, Pat, I would say my primary emotion when I saw that on social media was just sadness, like for the family, for the people involved, for the marriage. And so to the extent that we can have a conversation that intersects between life and work and leadership that would prevent or help people sort of see this coming and prevent them from engaging in anything that would wind up on a kiss cam, let's do that.
Yeah, if one person avoids this because of that, it's worth it. Let me say right off the bat, we're going to focus on the CEO. We realized two executives were involved, and the fact that one was in HR, it makes it all the more salacious and interesting from a corporate perspective. But this could be a man or a woman situation. We're going to be saying a lot of he, because we're going to be referring to the CEO a lot. And because I've actually, in my career, in like 30 years of consulting to CEOs, I've seen, and I have to say, like the 5 examples of this that I've seen have been guys. And CEOs seem to be very susceptible to this problem. And anyway, we want to talk about why it happens to leaders. And why it might not be as black and white as we think. Because here's the deal. I don't think everybody listening to this podcast or every leader in the world is at risk of this happening. But it could happen to almost anyone. And I would rather shock people by scaring them and talking about how to avoid this than assume that you don't need to hear this and have somebody later say, man, if I'd heard that 5 years ago, it wouldn't have happened. Because I think this guy and this gal probably would have said at one point in their career, maybe even a few years ago, that could never happen to me.
Yeah, you said that point, Pat, as we were having this conversation in advance, and I think that's something people should lean into. I think probably both of them would have said, hey, you know what? There's no way I would, there was no path that I would take, no incentive or enticing moments that I would lean into, and then they wound up in a very public and embarrassing situation. And so I think it is a sober-minded scare to say, like, hey, let's just take a look at this. Like you said, not in a salacious way, but how do we as leaders put not just defensive parameters, but how do we think about situations like this in a way that would prevent us from ever winding up in that scenario?
Exactly. And it's worth saying this, just in case anybody's wondering, to be very clear, Cody and I, and we've talked about this, we've been faithful to our wives. And so, but we're not here to say, oh, we're high and mighty and people that done this, they're all dirtbags. Now, we're also not making excuses, because what happened to those families, and man, everybody I talked to says, can you imagine being his wife and her husband? So we're not making excuses for them. We're not going to say, well, you have to understand it was horrible. But, and though I can't relate to it in exactly the same terms, I know enough people that have done this, and I can see how this can happen to leaders. And that's what we want to talk about today, is what happens to people when they're in a position of leadership, which is power and fame and all these other things. What happens that leads to these things happening?
And Pat, you had written up a couple thoughts that actually is super helpful to frame up the conversation. And I know you're probably not going to read them, but do you want to just kind of tee up the whole conversation so we can dive in?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing we want to focus on is that when you become a leader, you're susceptible to, you're exposed to certain lies that if you believe them, you will start to change your outlook. I wrote a book called The Motive, which talks about if you're a leader, you should be responsibility centered. It's about others rather than reward centered, which is about what you get out of leadership. But nobody's born one way or the other, and we can slip. So you become a leader. And I was just thinking about this in talking about Coldplay, which is ironic because he got divorced from his wife, who was an actress, who I understand is now doing ads for that company, which is ridiculous. But this happens to rock stars and professional athletes and famous people and CEOs, because what happens is they start to believe the lie that they're special and they deserve special treatment and that they're wonderful because people tell them what they want to hear, they laugh at their jokes louder, and they praise them. And while it's not always fake, it's often exaggerated, and it's easy for any leader to start to believe this stuff. And when they start to believe it and start to think, man, maybe I am this special, maybe I am this important, they then look at their personal life in a different way. It gets skewed. And that's when they begin to think, maybe I deserve more in my life. And that plays out in wealth and all these other things, but it also plays out sometimes in really stupid decisions about personal relationships.
Well, and I actually love anchoring some of this conversation in the motive, Pat, because you write about in that book, if you're a reward-centered leader, then you're seeking attention and accolades and power and fame and all of those things that aren't actually core tenets of leadership that people fall susceptible to because they think this is for me. And if you're a reward-centered leader at work, the likelihood that you are a reward-centered leader when you pull into the driveway at home is probably a lot higher. So I think you even said in the book, Pat, that nobody should become a parent if your leadership motive is off, because there's not a lot of reward in there for you. There's plenty of reward in there for you, but not the ways that you think in terms of like, well, I shouldn't have to, do the hard things or take care of the kids or clean up or change dirty diapers. So I think anchoring some of this in the idea that this is maybe more susceptible for people if they haven't checked their leadership motive out of the gate.
Yes. You know what it reminds me of too, Cody? That we're going to go a little philosophical and theological here, maybe. But people think this is a sexual sin primarily. But the core of all sin, including lust, is pride. And I think what happens is people start to think, I should be able to do whatever I want.
Right.
And probably it's not only, there's probably other areas of this guy's life, for instance, that he started to give into around, well, I deserve certain things. And it's interesting because I think people look at this and they think, well, a guy got caught who decided to have sex with a woman that's not his wife, and he got caught. Oh, he deserves what he gets. It's way more, it's more complex than that. And there's a lot of things that happened along the way that led to this moment.
Yeah, I like the pride conversation too, Pat, because you're right. It's like I deserve. There's that saying like ultimate power corrupts or what is it? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And there's some version of that in leadership that is, hey, I deserve whatever it is that's coming my way. In fact, I deserve to go out of my way to get things because either I think I'm too self-important or that I'm doing these amazing things by leading this company or garnering more revenue, whatever it is. And that right there, combined with that reward-centered leadership, is a perfect recipe for engaging in behavior that you're going to regret.
Exactly. Let's go into some of this very specific things that happen to a leader at work. They go to work and people there are dressed up nicer than you dress up at home. So people actually think about, I'm going to present myself really nicely because I'm having a meeting with the CEO today and I want to impress them. And then they laugh at your jokes more and they nod and they smile and they pay attention to you. They thank you more. They actually compliment you more than is deserved. Now, I'm not saying it's all brown nosing, but the thing is, you're going to get maximum levels of those things at work. And it's going to be really hard not to be susceptible to believing that it's all real. And then you walk in the door at home. And by the way, as an empty nester now, I think about how much I wish I could go home and have my kids come running to me at the door and go, they don't go, welcome home. They're like, I need help with algebra, or Michael hit me, or, the toilet's overflowing. I look back at that and I appreciated it then, but I look back and think those were amazing times. But in the moment, if you buy into all the crap you get at work, the good stuff, you're going to go home and think, this is ridiculous. And my wife doesn't come dressed up in her best business suit to tell me what a brilliant person I am. She might say, I need you to run and get this kid, or run to the store. I forgot this thing. It is very easy, if you're not well grounded in your faith and in your marriage, to start to think like, I deserve more than this.
Yeah, and Pat, we could probably do a whole episode, a podcast episode about like how you should think about your family and pour into your family and think about being a responsibility-centered leader at home. But there are seasons where, like you said, it's, I have a almost 7, 5, and 3-year-old, and it's not always, the most cleanly, well-presented environment when I get home, and that can be hard. Now, there's so much rewarding about it, and my kids, I'm still in the stage where just yesterday, they all basically tackled me when I came in the door. So there's a whole conversation we could have about how investing in, giving time and attention to, and the energy you put into your family can probably do a lot to dissuade you of any possible temptation at work. But like you said, Pat, there is a real situation at work where people are putting on their best, and you're getting the best of, the best presentation, at least, of a lot of the people that are surrounded as your peers.
I'm going to go into a nuance there because you were just describing that. I actually wonder, Cody, if more people don't cheat as their kids get older. Because I think this is rooted in wounds. I mean, people don't want to say that. It's like, well, that guy's a dirtbag, and that's all. Well, everybody has the potential to be a dirtbag, and we have wounds. And I think that when your kids get older and they don't necessarily provide you with the affection, and if your wife is running around or your husband, and we're all so busy, you start to actually, even without realizing it, think, man, nothing's coming my way. And I think that you start to you can probably wander when that happens. And because I don't think when people have little kids, I gotta think that they're even less likely to think about this. But maybe when their kids are gone more or less likely to run and greet them at the door, they start to think like, gee, what's in this for me? Which is ridiculous, I know, but it's human.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder what the data would prove out in terms of like when people are more, prone to that type of behavior. I will say this, and it speaks to a whole nother layer of this conversation where if you start to feel a desire to be away from home, like running, your kids running to you when you walk in the door is such a beautiful feeling. If the moment that it feels like going on a business trip is going to be, and spending a night away is going to be more relieving than it is to be home with the family, that's maybe an indicator that you should check what's going on in your heart and in your life.
Yeah, and that's not to say that everybody listening to this can be like, hey, sometimes getting on that airplane is the best thing ever because I don't have any chores to do and I can't. And hey, I have to be away for a day or two. And yeah, I'm going to take advantage of that and sleep, go to bed a little earlier and all that. But it's when you prefer the company of others, especially it's the company of others to the people at home. That's a great red flag. You know something, Cody? I have a list of the people I know that cheated on their spouses. And in this case, it was all on their wives. Every one of them had kids that were older. I just thought about that. Their kids were in their teens. Not that teenagers are difficult. Wait till that happens, Cody. It's a different world. But I think there's something about probably feeling even lonelier during that time. But I digress. Let's talk about
that paper away after this podcast, Pat.
Yeah, you know something? Even on the paper, I wrote initials.
Okay.
And I don't know why, but I just didn't want to write the names down. That's weird. But let's talk about things you can do to prevent this. One of the things I say is this: say out loud at work to the people that work for you, your family and your marriage is more important than your job. Say it out loud, say it regularly, and don't hold that back. Because the more you say it out loud, the more you're going to remind yourself and others. And people are going to remind, if they see somebody start to slide a little bit, they're going to go, hey, are you spending more time here working on this instead of being at home? And they might be the thing that catches you from taking that first bad step.
Yeah, and I'll even go a little bit further, Pat, and say, yeah, your actions have to back up what you say. I read a quote literally last night, not in preparation for this at all. It just came across on my Instagram, I think it was, but um, and I think it was I can't remember the author, but I think the book was the five levels of wealth or something like that. But he's talking in a chapter about the family. He says, in 20 years from now, the only people who will remember that you worked late are your kids. And I was like, "Oh, man, that is just that is such a real reality to say like, hey, those extra hours you're putting in at home, even if you say your family's more important, the only people they're gonna remember in 20 years are the ones that you left home, not the ones at work that were thankful that you were there."
Totally true. And that's we got in a little bit of a debate before we started this, even an argument, if you will, um, about this podcast and like, do people need to hear this? And we were like, well, what percentage of people would even be susceptible to this? And we're like, it's probably more than you think. And we thought, well, we probably heard these warnings when we were younger, and that helped us get to the point where we avoided those things. Like just saying what you just said, it's like people will hear that, even if they've heard it before, and they're going to go, oh crap. And people will say, when you're on your deathbed, you're not going to say, I wish I had worked more hours. No. Now I know there's horrible guilt that people feel like, oh no, I should quit my job. No, you need to provide for your family and you need other things to do. But it's a great reminder. And here's the second thing that I tell people to do: say out loud to the people you work with, and to your spouse, and to others, the adulation and affirmation I get at work is at least partially artificial or exaggerated. And I know I shouldn't buy into it, because there are structural or contextual things that make it more exaggerated. Because if you don't think that, you can start to believe that it's all real. And especially now, this is what I'm going to say is kind of crazy. So many CEOs I know were not cool kids growing up. They actually studied harder, worked harder, might not have even been very social. They get into a position of leadership, and suddenly people are paying attention to them and thinking they're pretty cool that they didn't before. And they're liable to go, I mean, I know a guy that left his wonderful wife and there's kids, and I couldn't believe it. It shocked me. And I remember thinking, he has never been cool in his life. And now all these women at work are telling him how wonderful he is. And he probably thought, my wife hasn't told me that in a long time. And she doesn't flirt with me like these people do. And I think he just probably said, well, I guess I never got girls when I was young. This is the time to do it. I honestly think there's people that are that simple about it. And then they look back and they go, what the hell happened?
When I think what I enjoy about how practical you're sort of making some of these that seem maybe even obvious, like, hey, don't do that and say these things, is that like so much of this is you don't just wind up on a kiss cam. It's not like step one, kiss cam. It's that there's a text message you shouldn't have sent or received, or a phone call you shouldn't have picked up, or an email or after meeting conversation that you shouldn't have had, that all just led to you being in a situation that and I like this, like, let's catch it as early as possible and the stepping stones that lead to the kiss cam, because before you know it, you're way too far down that path.
And when I hated when people said, they were so stupid. If they'd just stood there, they wouldn't have got caught. And I even saw things online like they should have just gone to a motel like everybody else. What are they doing out in public? And it's like, getting caught is not what they should be feeling bad about. Maybe getting caught in a way that embarrassed their families even more. But as you and I were talking before, getting caught was a blessing.
It could be the best thing that happens to them. And I shared this with you, Pat, is like, I think that one of the ways, if we're talking about how do you prevent anything leading to something like this, is like, imagine you on a kiss cam. Imagine your family in the front row of a Coldplay concert. Like, if the behavior that you're exhibiting or the path that you're on is going to lead to hurt and despair and just like crush your family, imagine whatever you're doing up for everybody to see, not only at a concert, but on social media. And if that's not enough to help you get scared of and correct behavior and really run towards like being a whole person and investing in your family, then it'd be hard pressed to find another mechanism to get you to do the right thing.
Right. That should frighten the hell. And other people seen this happen. Maybe there's people that were about to start this, or maybe there are people that are in a relationship like this and they're going to stop. And I hope everybody listening to this will pray, both for that guy and the woman, the HR lady, that their families might, by the grace of God, find a way to reconcile. Who knows? I pray for that. But let's also pray for anybody else out there that's tempted to do this or is doing it, that they might stop it and recover and repent, because this is not just a funny thing. This is a tragic thing. And sometimes I think the humor around it can really, really dampen the lesson that needs to be learned. Here's another thing, Cody, that you and I have talked about. Engage in joint projects with your spouse so that you get to see him or her in light of their talents. Sometimes all of the joint work we do is just errands and chores and helping the kids, which is all wonderful. But if you're not doing something where you get to see them in their genius, because the truth is your spouse has geniuses just like your colleagues, but you've not had a chance to actually witness them in that. Find a way to engage in a project with them where you get to see how wonderful they are, and you're not just seeing them as somebody who's limited to one facet of their lives.
Yeah, Pat, I love this one. I think like working on a big project that is, you know, not to make this overly prescriptive, like a meetings conversation that we're having, but when we often talk about having a thematic goal at work, which is this like big, audacious goal that we're trying to accomplish in the next 6 to 9 months, we so rarely do this with our families. And as a result, what happens is, just like in business, you just end up doing the standard operating objectives. And at home, the standard operating objectives are cleanliness and the kids' bedtime and chores and laundry and all this stuff. And there's no shared vision, and you're building something bigger than just the standard operating objectives. And I found this in my own marriage, Pat. Like when Lindsay and I have a thematic goal that we're checking in on regularly, that we're trying to like move towards this big aspirational thing that we've co-created together, we are just in a totally different spot than when we're just focused on the standard operating objectives of our home.
You know what's so funny, Cody? So my wife is very talented and was a trainer in consulting, and she loves the kind of work we do. And then we had 4 boys, and she was home on most of the time. And she was like, I want to go back to work, but I can't yet. And I remember when she started teaching this Bible study, and I would stop by church during the day where she had this Bible study for women called Walking with Purpose. And I would go in to see her, and I would see her with all these women, and she was teaching them, and she was interacting with them. And I would be so proud of her. And it was like I was seeing this woman that I hadn't seen in so long. And it's not to say that, oh, I had no respect for her, but I got to appreciate her fully. And it was like, I loved that I got to do that. And we need to do those things so that we don't forget how wonderful our spouses are, and start idealizing the people that go to work just because they show up in a different setting.
And I think we're, you know, as human beings, we're wired to accomplish things. Like we talk about this all the time. We want to contribute to the world. We want to like dream up big dreams and then go after them together. And we're, you know, we've often said that life is a team sport. We don't do it on our own. And so I think there is a trap in the corporate or work environment where you're like, oh, we have a shared vision and a goal, and we're all collaborating towards this goal. And we don't often treat our home life the same way. And it is a total game changer when you do. And I think your book, Pat, oh, you're about to hold it up. I love this.
I had it on my desk for the 24 people that watch this on YouTube rather than on the listen to audio. I have a book that I wrote years ago called The 3 Big Questions for a Frantic Family. And if you want to know something about my family, this was the closest thing to autobiographical that I did, because Laura and I lived this. And even the picture on the front is our old house. And the minivan that's blurring by is our friend's minivan. And we wrote a book about how to run your family more like a business, but it's really not just, it's about seeing your spouse as your co-leader of the family, because that's the most important organization you run. And it's just so crazy when we think like that your spouse might be even more invested in your children or your home life. That's more important than anything anybody's doing at work. And to actually devalue that and start to think that these other people who run HR or something else, it's more admirable, is just insane. It's completely upside down.
Yeah, and I love what you said, Pat. It's the most important organization. And I don't even know, after all this, Pat, I'm not even sure what Astronomer does. I think it's like an AI tech company. But what's so funny is that we will have great meetings. We will have a vision. We will work towards that vision. We think about it together at work. And what I love about your book, Frantic Family, is when you say it's about how to run your family like a business, it's actually not the tactics of it. It's the big picture part of it. Like, how do we build the life that we want and be as intentional about it as we are in our companies?
Exactly. I want to tell you something. My son is a freshman. He's going to be a sophomore in college. He's here today at the office. And I give speeches, I write books. We have the Working Genius. I love it all. I love the work I do. Him being here is the highlight of my year. Because my family is more important. I love my son. And the fact that he's like learning our business from my friends here at work and just having, I'm like, he doesn't realize this. He's going to hear it now. But that is way bigger to me than any applause I could get in a speech or any book I could write or any review somebody would write. And I think that if you're listening to this and you've lost sight of that, I think it's really good to go, oh yeah, let's get back to that. Let's get back to that. Here's another thing, Cody, I think it's really important to bring your home life to work for this reason. So I've traveled with people my whole life, women and guys, for speeches and stuff like that. They are all friends of my wife, and I am friends with their spouses. When we're traveling together, we talk about our families and our wives. The chances that we would even drift into intimacy are so much less when we're part of the same ecosystem. But people that go to work and they have a completely separate life, it's these anonymous people. And I'm not saying that should be the one thing that keeps you from cheating on your spouse. That would be so patently ridiculous. But everything that allows you to realize I am first and foremost a husband and a father, or a wife and a mother, and that everybody else at work knows that about me, it just makes it less likely that you're going to glamorize your relationships at work. Does that make sense?
Totally. I actually don't even think that's oversimplifying it at all, Pat. I think part of what we do in this whole podcast is to say, hey, this idea that you go to work and you're a separate person and you come home and you're a separate person and you're separating those worlds. Like, there's even that popular TV show called Severance, where they do this at like a neurological level. I think that you're absolutely right. This is what we constantly talk about, is like, you're a whole person. In the same way, sometimes you bring, stuff you're going through at home to work. You're bringing work back to home. And the more you integrate those lives, they don't feel separate. You're not tempted to believe that you're getting things from places that are completely separate or you can't get from the other place. So I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that.
Yeah, I think there's a danger when I've talked to people and they go, I don't even know what my spouse does. I don't get their work. It's like, I think you better learn. Even if you don't think it's interesting, give yourself something you can talk about so you can share in that experience and not make it separate. Okay, we need to wrap this up pretty soon. But what's the real point we want to make here, Cody?
Well, I think, Pat, in all of our discussions, is everything that we do in leadership, whether you're reward centered, all the things that we talked about, if you're searching for something that feels like you're unsatisfied by, like, we've had conversations on this podcast about wounds and what is that about, and how do we become more of a whole person? But if you're like in leadership, like, there's so many people that would say, that guy's a CEO, he's probably making good money, he's handsome, he's got a wife and kids, like, what else could he want? And if there's still a part of you that is searching for something beyond all of that, there really is only one answer, and then you're not going to find it outside of a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, I believe that, because we are first and foremost a child of God, and that's enough. And Cody, what you reminded me of is these two sayings with the word enough in it. I'm not enough, and it's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And if I feel like I'm not enough, then I feel like I have to perform more. And let me tell you, you become the vice president of finance and you're like, no, but I need to be the CEO. And then you're the CEO and you're like, I need to be the CEO of a bigger company. We need to go public. It's never enough. And if you're doing things and you feel like it's never enough, you're bound to start doing really dumb things, thinking that maybe this will make you happy. And you know something? I don't know the story of that CEO, but maybe he thought this was actually going to make him happy. And that's just so sad.
I know.
So just, if you feel like you're not enough and you feel like whatever you're getting in life is not enough, go address that. Find help for that. Talk to a priest or a minister or a counselor. And I think that's it. Oh, we want to also, before we finish here, we need to say, please subscribe, punch the like button, whatever you do, whatever you kids do out there, you know, so that so more people can hear about these things. And if you know of anybody that could benefit from this episode, please forward it on to them. We think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's it, right, Cody?
I think that's it. I love just, like you said, if you don't feel like enough or there isn't enough out there for you, there's only one spot to find that. And so to the extent that people can engage in that and find peace and wholeness, that would be amazing.
Yes. And so as we always say at the end, but especially today, we want to say, God bless you. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next time.